Welcome, you're on The Fringe Show. I'm your host, Tatiana Zalan, and I go live every Friday at 2 p.m. Dubai time. The Fringe is about our future in science, technology, art, economy, and society. I help you to navigate the rapidly changing world and uncertain future so that you too can take advantage of the opportunities and make better decisions. In this episode, and that's number 54 already, I take a different angle on the issue of how the future of metaverse will unfold. And you know, probably those of you who follow me, I talk about a metaverse and metaverses a lot. And that's because according to some technologies, some analysts, it's really the future of the internet. So one of the key questions is whether the grand vision of the metaverse, open, decentralized, interoperable, and most importantly, one, will be realized. And what I would argue here is that geopolitics may play a decisive role in shaping metaverse's direction. And this is not something that we talk about a lot in the metaverse space, but I think it's a very important point to make. Nascent metaverses are already breaking down along the geopolitical lines. China is developing its own version of the metaverse with so-called Chinese characteristics. So if you're an investor, entrepreneur, or executive, a government official, and any sort of other decision maker, then you probably need to pay attention and make the right investment choices for the future. A usual disclaimer before we get to the actual content is that the views here are my own and do not represent the official views of organizations and employers I'm associated with. This is not investment advice of any sort, and the Fringe is for educational purposes only. Now, let's start with the metaverse's grand vision. I already said that really the way we see the future of metaverse, it's open, decentralized, interoperable, and one. Who or what will shape metaverse's direction? If you look at, say, Citibank's recent report on metaverse, they say that if most users access the metaverse via mobile phone, then the operating system will be the same. So consumer hardware manufacturers will be portals to the metaverse and potential gatekeepers. They're also cognizant that the fact that similar to today, there will be likely a split between a US and international and China firewall-based metaverse. There will be also a spectrum of based on technologies and business models from, say, metaverse centralization to metaverse decentralization. For everyday users, interoperability and seamless exchange between underlying blockchain technology will be really critical. There will be dominant or different forms of cryptocurrencies that will dominate. But given that there is a thrust towards this multi-chain trend in the crypto ecosystem generally, cryptocurrencies are likely to coexist with fiat currencies, central bank digital currencies, and stable coins. Just to illustrate why interoperability is so important, let's take DeFi and NFTs. DeFi can actually help to unlock the value NFTs if they're used as a collateral for lending. This is especially true for high-value NFTs that cannot be unlocked unless you sell them outright. Mark Zuckerberg, not very long time ago, said that no single company will operate or own the metaverse. It will be, according to him, a decentralized space with different companies providing components that are interoperable. So in this scenario, users will have the ability to move avatars and digital goods between more than one metaverse environment. And a more decentralized infrastructure will enable reliable mechanisms for tracking who owns what. And this is precisely for this reason many people in the space consider blockchain to be a key enabling technology in the metaverse. Now that we understand what the grand vision is, well, how are geopolitics shaping the metaverse direction? it will play a key role, I would argue. As we're moving to a multipolar world, the center of economic gravity has already shifted to Southeast Asia and particularly China. If you look at what geopolitical futurist Abhishek Prakash is saying, is that the metaverse is like a blank canvas that nations will use to advance their political agenda, geopolitical agenda. He's a co-founder of the Center for Innovating the Future. So the internet was supposed to bring the world together, but instead we see that technology is causing the world to divide. And the main reason for why we see it happening, according to Prakash, is because governments no longer want to attach themselves to global systems, platforms, and ideas that govern the whole world since the Second World War. Nations are looking at technology through the lens of sovereignty, ideology, and competitiveness. And this is also emerging, we see, with the metaverse. One of the main issues being which metaverse or metaverses will be used and how they will be regulated. Again, according to him, he argues that first, there will be no single metaverse. The whole world will use at the same time. Different countries will have their own metaverses with their own societies and populations, and that will split the world along new fault lines. And we already see this with other technologies happening. Take AI, quantum computing, and cybersecurity. It's already splitting the world along very different lines. And maybe you've heard about the new alliance between US and UK and Australia called AUKUS, and that has isolated its previous partners and allies like France and Germany and Canada. Technology regulations in China have isolated the Chinese cyberspace from the rest of the world. Incipient metaverses are also breaking along geopolitical lines. If we take WeChat and TikTok, they're like mini metaverses. And what we see happening is that the nascent Chinese metaverses represented, or these super apps, as we would call them, is unlikely to be portable to new jurisdictions. The streaming video app, which is so highly popular everywhere, TikTok, has shown the ability to operate across cultures and is widely popular in China and outside of China. But already these mini metaverses have run into cultural concerns and regulatory issues across borders. I don't know, maybe you're familiar with the fact that India banned already 270 apps coming from China because they see it as a threat to national security. The interconnected tech ecosystem between these two countries no longer exists, and other countries we see are becoming very quickly battlegrounds for Chinese and US companies as they're fighting for market share and influence. Now, let's take a closer look at China. China is very interesting. Beijing is dead set against allowing blockchain-based decentralized economies to develop within the country, and they would not allow it to remain outside of central control. Chinese developers will not be allowed to develop DeFi apps targeting at least the Chinese market. So what is Beijing doing now? They're pursuing a strategy to roll out their own central bank digital currency and backing the launch of the Blockchain Services Network, or BSN. And this is intended to be a low-cost platform for establishing blockchain applications and helping Chinese firms grow in the space. But mind you, it's all centralized. China will use their digital yuan and the BSN as tools to prevent the creation of a transaction-focused or transaction layer-focused, rather decentralized metaverse in China. However, does it mean that companies will not continue developing metaverses with Chinese characteristics? I think they will, but again, they will be different. China will establish their own version of the metaverse that's suited to their economic policies and ambitions and homegrown technical expertise, and of course, the aspirations of people. 2021 and 2022 were very important years because this is where Chinese policies on the metaverse took shape. So China has taken steps to regulate the metaverse. Firstly, in 2021, it established the so-called Chinese Metaverse Industry Committee, and it was the first industry group dedicated to this concept. And not surprisingly, it's driven by telecom heavyweights like China Mobile, China Unicom, and China Telecom. These infrastructures have partnered with other tech companies to form the committee, and they will be leveraging the advantages in 5G infrastructure, cloud computing, cloud gaming, and VR, of course. Chinese regulators have not really tackled the issue of how to regulate some aspects of the metaverse, and particularly the legal status of NFTs. We'll come to NFTs in a minute. And some types of transactions involving digital assets may not be supported by existing laws. Another interesting development took place in May 2022 when the state-backed China Computer Industry Association founded another metaverse committee called the Metaverse Industry Professional Committee. And this committee will develop industry standards, help authorities create industry roadmaps, as well as helping with funding to support startups and explore various use cases like manufacturing, commerce, tourism, healthcare, education, and so on. And on the negative, metaverse industry won't include, we know that for sure, won't include cryptocurrencies, decentralization, and financial assets. So Chinese companies may pursue the further development of the metaverse, but without a transactional layer. And I want to make 2 points about China and their relationship with the metaverse. First, new laws on data ownership, that's very, very important, and regulation of crypto and NFTs. So let's start with the new laws. What we see clearly that the collection of sensitive personal data poses another challenge to the metaverse, not just Chinese metaverse, but metaverses in general, because with the help of VR headsets, they're equipped with sensors, they can track your eye, they can track your hand and body movements, and even monitor your individual facial expressions and vital signs, generally speaking. And it's increasingly likely that governments all over the world will localize data processing and storage. They will impose regulatory frameworks to address data security and privacy. And this will have long-ranging applications for tech companies operating in China, but also outside China. What's the end result? Well, we'll probably end up with a splintered collection of local networks rather than just globally connected metaverse. In September 2021, China passed new laws on data ownership. And what they say is, in effect, that money, people, land, and data are considered to be national assets. And that includes all Chinese companies and all data foreign companies own Chinese citizens. What does this mean? Total nationalization of data. And let's delve into it, as it's very important. Under Chinese current data regulations, users cannot freely explore virtual worlds hosted outside of the national borders. And metaverse builders are forced to create localized versions of their product in each jurisdiction. China's Great Firewall will not disappear. It will persist in the metaverse. If more countries adopt China's strict data regulations, the most likely outcome is a splinternet where products, users, and data are all enclosed in separate pools by regulatory schemes. China has long sought to shield its domestic internet from outside influences with a policy called cyber sovereignty. They're very strong about it. But these new laws and regulations are forcing companies, both domestic and foreign companies, to keep data related to local customers and operations inside the country, inside China. An interesting side effect of that is that domestic companies are restricted in where and how they fundraise. Beijing is limiting data-rich companies in particular from going public overseas. And that could be a blow to many internet platforms that are hoping to take advantage of high valuations on US exchanges. TikTok, for example, and it's not TikTok, but the owner ByteDance was seeking a New York listing at some point, but now they decided on pursuing maybe an IPO in Hong Kong. And in case you're wondering what happened to Jack Ma and Ant Financial, exactly the same thing. It's a data-rich company and it can't fundraise outside of China. And the second important point that I would like to make is China's ban on crypto and NFTs, the regulations. And we're all familiar, those of us who've been in the space for quite some time, know that China is very strict on cryptocurrencies. They just disapprove of centralized currencies. And that compels consumers to invest in fiat currencies, to trade NFTs, and allowing at the same time the government to oversee all these transactions. What about NFTs in particular? There are various government and professional bodies, such as China's Banking Association, and they issued a set of guidelines for the NFT industry. And most importantly, and that's a very critical point, is that underlying assets of NFTs could not include things like bonds, insurance, securities, precious metals, and other financial assets. Plus, of course, there are obligations for platforms to verify identities on NFT issuance, sale, and purchase. What will be the impact on the metaverse? Well, all this swirl of technical and governmental and commercial sources of internet fragmentation is likely to fracture the future virtual world. It will lower the interoperability and interconnectedness of the metaverse. And this recent regulatory landscape in China that we just discussed suggests that the notion of statelessness would hold no meaning in the Chinese metaverse. They're very much into sovereignty, and particularly data sovereignty. So what's the net result? Well, we may end up with two types of metaverses. One is a Western decentralized metaverse, or metaverses, and the other one is more centralized, authoritarian, censored metaverse running on largely Chinese hardware and embedded within the political preferences and social controls. And all of that is coming from Beijing. The big question is whether these two types of metaverses will be wholly interoperable or perhaps partially interoperable. Some believe there will be at least partially interoperable, but some analysts are more and kind of more pessimistic, if you will. And one particular analyst from Dexio Consulting is saying that that in the West, the metaverse will be very interconnected and propelled by users. And in China, it will be very isolated and there will be basically no connection between the two. So these two will exist on their own and they will not be interoperable. So what are some of the takeaways? What should executives be aware of? Well, if you believe futurist Mebisha Prakash, then nations are looking at technology through the lens of sovereignty, ideology, and competitiveness. And there's a real possibility then that the metaverse will be splintered. Could China end up cultivating its own ecosystem isolated from international metaverses? Yes, that's highly unlikely. In much the same way it has developed its parallel internet with a great firewall. Will genuine interoperability be possible? Well, that's a really huge question. Geopolitics in the metaverse poses significant risks for executives and investors, I would say, and that's due to regulation. For entrepreneurs, it clearly limits the size of the industry. The total the total addressable market, as we say in startup speak, and for Chinese startups as well. So my suggestion is that if you're a decision maker, then you really need to factor these risks in very, very carefully. Be aware of the regulations, be aware of the huge issue of data ownership, data sovereignty, and interoperability. So I hope that you found this information useful and you will consider that when you're making your decisions about the metaverse. Geopolitics are very, very important. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll hope to see you next Friday at 2 p.m. Dubai time. Thank you for joining me again.